We were both sitting in the living room, a place that used to feel so inviting and alive, but now it just seemed empty and cold. She glanced over at me, and it wasn't anger or sadness in her eyes. Instead, there was this distant, almost emotionless look that completely threw me off. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and almost sounded like she'd practiced what she was going to say. "I don't need you anymore. I'm better off on my own." At first, her words didn't really register. It was like my mind just refused to accept what I was hearing. I managed to get out, "What do you mean?" hoping maybe I'd misunderstood her somehow. But she didn't leave any room for confusion. "I want out. This marriage isn't working for me, and honestly, I've been thinking about this for a long time." Hearing that felt like getting hit by a freight train. For a second, it was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I searched her face, desperate to see some hint of doubt or regret, but there was nothing. She wasn't mad or even particularly sad, she just seemed finished. I couldn't help but wonder how long she'd been carrying this decision around while I had no idea. I tried to talk her out of it. "We've been together for so many years. We've built a whole life side by side. If something's wrong, we can fix it. You can't just walk away from everything we've shared." My voice broke, but I didn't care about that. I just wasn't ready to let go of everything we'd built. But her reply was as cold as the look on her face. "That's the thing. I don't want to fix it. My mind's made up. I need to focus on myself now." She got up and started heading toward the bedroom, leaving me there, completely stunned. It was honestly the most surreal experience I'd ever had. This was the woman I'd loved and trusted with everything, and now she was telling me I didn't fit into her future anymore. The days after that conversation just blurred together. She went about everything in this almost businesslike way, packing up her stuff, sorting out what belonged to who, even drafting an email to make the split official, like it was just another task on her to-do list. There wasn't a trace of emotion from her. It felt like I was mourning someone who was still alive, and the worst part was, she didn't seem to care at all. The night she finally left for good was strangely quiet. She didn't even say a real goodbye, just a quick, "Take care," as she walked out with her bags. I sat there in the silence of our now empty apartment, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I kept replaying every moment, every conversation, trying to figure out what I'd missed. How did I not see this coming? Was it something I did, or maybe something I failed to do? That first night alone was absolutely brutal. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could do was sit there, overwhelmed by a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. It honestly felt like my whole world had just fallen apart. But looking back, that night ended up being the start of something much bigger, something I never could have seen coming. Those first few days after she left were almost unbearable. The quiet in the apartment was so heavy that even the smallest sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the low hum of the fridge, felt painfully loud. Even though I was drowning in my own grief, a part of me couldn't help but wonder how she was handling this, better off alone, life she'd been so sure about. That curiosity, though, quickly turned into something else. It all started when I got a notification on my phone. I hadn't unfollowed her on social media yet, I just wasn't ready for that. She'd posted a photo, her smiling wide, holding a glass of wine, surrounded by friends at what looked like a rooftop bar. The caption said, "Here's to new beginnings." People jumped in right away, leaving comments and cheering her on for her newfound freedom. Seeing that felt like someone twisting a knife in my chest. Over the following days, her social media kept lighting up with new posts. It was like she was on a mission to show the world just how fantastic her life had become without me. There were snapshots of fancy brunches, spontaneous weekend trips, yoga classes, and even a photo of her laughing with a bunch of people I'd never seen before. She looked so carefree, like she was living her best life. If she was trying to broadcast the start of a perfect new chapter, she was definitely pulling it off. I won't pretend it didn't sting. While she was out there flaunting her independence, I was stuck at home, trying to pick up the pieces and drowning in questions about what went wrong. But the more I looked at her posts, the more something felt off. Everything seemed a little too perfect, almost staged. This wasn't the woman I'd shared my life with for so long. She used to roll her eyes at yoga, and those rooftop bars she kept visiting were the same ones she used to call overrated. None of it felt genuine. Then, out of the blue, I started hearing things from people we both knew. One of our mutual friends reached out, sounding a bit uneasy. "Hey, I don't want to get in your business," they said, "but is she alright? She's been out every night lately. It just seems weird." That was the first real crack in the picture she'd been painting online. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who noticed something was off. I also started hearing stories about the new crowd she was hanging around with. From what I could gather, they weren't exactly the best influences, lots of wild parties that went on until sunrise, and some questionable new relationships. It seemed like she was trying way too hard to prove something, whether to herself or maybe even to me. What really got to me, though, wasn't just her sudden transformation into a social butterfly, it was the stark difference between us. While she was out there trying to fill some kind of void with constant activity, I was at home, slowly finding a strange kind of clarity in the quiet. My life wasn't glamorous or Instagram-worthy, but at least my pain was honest. It hurt, but it was real. The real turning point came when someone sent me a candid photo from one of her nights out. She wasn't smiling or posing for the camera this time. Instead, she looked lost, just staring off into space, her drink untouched in front of her. For a second, I felt sorry for her, but that feeling quickly turned into something else, a realization. She wasn't really living her best life, she was just running from something. I didn't know what it was yet, but it was clear she hadn't found freedom, she was just avoiding whatever was really going on inside. The irony of it all was hard to ignore. She'd left me, insisting she'd be better off on her own, but everything she was doing seemed to say the opposite. While she was caught up in a whirlwind of distractions, I was quietly starting to put my life back together, one small step at a time. For the first time, I started to notice the cracks in the image she was trying so hard to maintain, and maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to find a little strength in myself. That photo of her, lost in thought at that party, stuck with me. It wasn't just the picture itself, it was what it meant. The perfect life she'd been showing off was starting to unravel, even if only in brief, unguarded moments. I wasn't out there digging for dirt on her, but little bits and pieces kept finding their way to me, and they painted a very different story than the one she was sharing online. It all started pretty innocently. A coworker who'd seen us together at plenty of work events asked about her during a coffee break. "How's she doing? I saw her at that new spot downtown the other night. She didn't look so good." I tried to keep my answer vague, just said we weren't together anymore. But his words stuck with me. It wasn't the first time someone had mentioned seeing her out, and the stories all seemed to have the same theme: late nights, too much drinking, and a kind of tiredness that no Instagram filter could hide. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from one of her longtime friends, a person she used to be really close with, but who she'd kind of drifted away from lately. The message started off gentle: "Hey, I hope I'm not crossing a line, but I'm worried about her. She's been acting different, and I thought you should know." Attached was a screenshot of their recent text conversation. In it, my ex-wife actually admitted she was having a much harder time than she let on. She talked about feeling alone and not really knowing if she'd made the right choices. Reading those words stirred up a weird mix of feelings in me. On one hand, I felt a little vindicated, like, here was proof that her so-called freedom wasn't the victory she'd been showing off to everyone. But at the same time, I felt this unexpected wave of sadness. No matter what had happened between us, I never wanted her to be miserable. I just wished she'd been real with me, instead of putting up this front like nothing could touch her. The more I found out, the clearer everything became. It wasn't just about her suddenly wild social life. She was struggling with money, too. Turns out, she'd really underestimated how expensive it would be to keep up the lifestyle she was showing off. All those nights out, the designer clothes, the trips, they added up fast, especially now that she didn't have the financial safety net we'd built together. And then there was her new group of friends. People we both knew, who'd stayed in touch with her, started mentioning how tense things were getting in her circle. These weren't people who'd stick by her through thick and thin, they were more like acquaintances, the kind who show up when things are fun but disappear when things get tough. One friend even told me about a night when she got left behind after a silly argument and had to call an Uber at 2 in the morning. That wasn't the kind of independence she'd been talking about. But what really hit me was a conversation I had with a mutual friend over coffee. They looked at me and said, "I don't think she knows who she is right now. She's trying so hard to be someone else, someone she thinks she's supposed to be, and it's just not working." That comment really struck a chord. It explained so much of what I'd been seeing. She wasn't just trying to prove something to everyone else, she was trying to convince herself, too. Meanwhile, while her life seemed to be spinning out of control, mine was slowly heading in a different direction. I wasn't out there chasing distractions or trying to cover up my pain. I was facing it head-on. And by doing that, I was starting to put myself back together, bit by bit. I started going back to the gym, throwing myself into work, and reconnecting with old friends, the kind of people who actually cared about me. I wasn't blasting my progress all over the internet, but I was making real changes, and honestly, that was enough for me. As more of the truth about her situation came to light, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. The life she'd left behind wasn't the problem. The real issue was that she couldn't face her own unhappiness. And for the first time, I realized maybe I wasn't the one who needed to change after all. It didn't take long before the cracks in her carefully constructed new life turned into full-on fractures. All those stories I'd been hearing, the late nights, the money problems, the shallow friendships, were just the beginning. Her attempt to reinvent herself had been falling apart for weeks, but now it was impossible to ignore. One day, I got a message from a mutual friend that just said, "You're not going to believe what happened." Apparently, she'd shown up at a party, dressed to impress as usual, still clinging to that image, but things went downhill fast. She got into a heated argument with someone from her new crowd, a guy she'd been seeing casually. The details were a little fuzzy, but he apparently called her out in front of everyone, making some harsh comment about her behavior. Instead of fighting back, she just broke down and started crying, then left the party in tears, completely humiliated. That was the moment when people around her finally started to see what I'd been seeing all along: the confidence she'd been showing off was just a thin layer. It was all for show, and now the act was falling apart for everyone to see. That I wish I could say that hearing about her downfall gave me some kind of satisfaction, but honestly, it didn't. If anything, I felt this odd mix of pity and relief: pity because nobody deserves to hit rock bottom like that, and relief because it finally drove home a truth I'd been slowly accepting: no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't have saved her from this. This was her journey to figure out, not mine to fix. The consequences of that night didn't just mess up her social life either. Her finances were in even worse shape than I'd realized. Friends we both knew told me she'd had to move out of the apartment she'd rented after leaving me. She just couldn't keep up with the rent and the lifestyle she thought she needed, and when it all got to be too much, she had to downsize: smaller place, fewer luxuries, and a lot less to distract her. Even then, though, it seemed like she was still trying to hold on to some version of her new self. She wasn't posting on social media as much anymore, but when she did, her captions sounded almost offensive, like she was trying to convince herself that everything was still okay. One post said, "Sometimes life just challenges you to grow," and it was paired with a photo of an empty coffee cup and a journal. But the comments were sparse now, and most of the likes came from people she barely knew. The crowd she'd once counted on had clearly moved on to other things. It was in those quieter moments, when the noise of her carefully curated life faded away, that I realized she wasn't really living, she was just getting by. And it hit me how different our paths had become. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was actually starting to thrive in ways I never expected. My career was picking up, my friendships were getting stronger, and for the first time in a long while, I was genuinely looking forward to what was next. I wasn't showing it off to the world, but I was living it, and that was enough. The most revealing moment came when a mutual friend let something slip by accident. She told me she regrets leaving, they said. She thought she'd find freedom, but all she found was emptiness. Those words stuck with me, not because I wanted her back, but because they confirmed what I'd suspected for a while. She wasn't just missing the life she'd left behind, she was mourning the realization that the freedom she'd chased after was never real in the first place. By this point, her world was just a shadow of what she tried to make it look like. The friends, the parties, the flashy lifestyle, it had all been temporary, just a way to distract herself from something deeper. And while she was still trying to pick up the pieces, I was finally moving forward, not looking back anymore. I was at work when I got the text. It was simple: "Can we talk?" Her name popped up on my phone for the first time in weeks. My first reaction wasn't anger or excitement, it was just curiosity. After everything that had happened, what could she possibly want to say? What was left to talk about? Still, even though I knew better, I agreed to meet her. Part of me wanted to hear her out, just to see what she thought could be salvaged from the mess she'd made. We met at this quiet little cafe near my office, a spot we'd gone to a few times back when we were married. She was already there when I walked in, nervously stirring a cup of coffee she hadn't even touched. When she looked up and saw me, her face was a mix of relief and uncertainty, like she wasn't sure I'd actually show. She looked different, tired, maybe even a little fragile. That confident, carefree version of her I'd seen on social media was nowhere to be found. "I'm sorry," she blurted out before I could even sit down. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to say this." I just nodded and took a seat across from her, keeping my expression neutral, waiting to hear what she had to say that I wasn't about to make this easy for her. She started talking, and it all just spilled out, a jumble of apologies and explanations, her words tumbling over each other. She admitted she'd never realized how much she depended on me, not just for money, but for emotional support, too. "I thought I needed to be alone to figure out who I was," she said, her voice shaky, "but all I really discovered was how much I gave up." She went on about how rough the last few weeks had been, how the friends she'd counted on had faded away, how trying to keep up that new lifestyle had left her completely drained, and how she'd spent so many nights by herself, wondering where it all went wrong. She finally admitted that leaving me hadn't solved her unhappiness. "It wasn't you," she whispered. "It was me. I just sat there and listened. I didn't feel the need to cut in or argue. Part of me thought I'd feel some kind of satisfaction, maybe even a little vindication, but honestly, I felt nothing. I wasn't angry anymore, and I wasn't sad either. I'd moved past all that." Her words, as honest as they sounded, didn't change anything for me. It was just too late. And then, just like I'd expected, she finally said it. "I want us to try again," she murmured, barely loud enough to hear. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to fix what I broke. Please." She reached across the table, like she wanted to take my hand, but I pulled mine back. "I can't," I told her, plain and simple. She froze, and I could see her face fall. "You're sorry now, and I believe you mean it, but I've spent these last few months putting myself back together, and I've realized something: I'm better off without you." I thought those words might hurt her, but instead, she just seemed to accept them. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I get it," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I had to try." We sat there in silence for a minute before I stood up to leave. "Take care of yourself," I said, and then I walked out. As I stepped outside, I felt this unexpected sense of closure. It wasn't the kind of satisfaction I'd imagined I'd want weeks ago, but it was freeing. I'd let her say her piece, and I'd made my choice. What really surprised me as I walked back to my office was how much lighter I felt. All the heaviness from her leaving, the confusion, the anger, it was just gone. I wasn't tied to her anymore, not by anger, not by love, not even by regret. I was finally free to focus on the life I was building, a life that didn't have space for someone who couldn't see my worth when it counted. And that, I realized, was the best outcome I could have hoped for. As I walked away from that cafe, I didn't look back. The weight of that meeting didn't stick with me. Instead, it left me with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in ages, I felt completely in control of my own life. That chapter with her was closed, and there was no bitterness in that, just a calm, final sense of moving on. I wasn't angry anymore, and I definitely wasn't sad. I'd simply outgrown her, and the life I'd built on my own was all the proof I needed. That night, I found myself looking back on everything I'd gone through since she walked out. The pain, the confusion, all those long nights spent wondering what I could have done differently, it all came flooding back. But as tough as it was, I realized every bit of it had been necessary. The hurt had forced me to really examine myself, to rebuild not just my daily routine, but my confidence and my sense of who I was. Somewhere along the way, I discovered something pretty amazing. I was capable of so much more than I'd ever given myself credit for. The next morning, I woke up feeling a kind of energy I hadn't felt in ages. I had a big presentation at work that day, one I'd been working on for weeks, and it ended up going better than I could have hoped. Afterward, my boss pulled me aside and hinted that a promotion might be in my future. But honestly, it wasn't just about the success at work, it was about how I felt up there, giving that presentation. I felt confident, sure of myself, like I was finally becoming the person I'd always wanted to be. Later that afternoon, I got a text from her. It was short, just, "Thank you for listening." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything left to say, and I knew that replying would only drag me back into a chapter I'd already closed. Instead, I focused on something, or rather, someone, who'd been bringing a little light into my life lately. There was this woman at work, younger than me, full of energy and sharp humor, with a kindness that felt genuine. I never expected to meet someone like her, let alone think about dating again, but our conversations had quickly become the best part of my day. That evening, we had plans to grab dinner together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely excited about what the future might hold. As I got ready, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The guy looking back at me wasn't the same man who'd once begged his wife not to leave. He wasn't the guy who'd spent sleepless nights scrolling through her social media, trying to make sense of her new life. That version of me was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, more grounded, and, most importantly, happier. Dinner that night was easy and fun. We laughed, swapped stories about work and travel, and I realized just how different this felt. There were no ghosts from the past hanging over me, no urge to compare this new experience to what I'd lost. It was all new, all mine, and it felt right. When I got home, I took a look around at the place I'd made for myself, a home that finally felt like mine, filled with things that made me happy, and I couldn't help but smile. She'd been right about one thing, I thought, I really was better off on my own. But not in the way she'd pictured. I wasn't stuck in loneliness or bitterness, I was thriving, building a life I could be proud of, and connecting with people who truly appreciated me. I didn't regret meeting her, and I didn't regret letting her go. In the end, her leaving turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, because it gave me the chance to rediscover myself, and maybe, just maybe, to find someone even better.